all committee members are present today via Zoom. This is a remote or online meeting where all participants will be on a video or audio conference. We're holding this meeting remotely so that everyone can participate safely while we are conducting business under a public health emergency. We appreciate your patience as LUPS meetings are conducted in this way. Members of the public will be able to address the committee if they have signed up for live public comment per the instructions published on the agenda and on our website Friday. Speakers will be moved into the meeting and will remain muted with their camera off until they are called upon to speak, at which point they can turn on their camera, unmute themselves, and will have 4 minutes to provide comments to the committee. After that, they will again be muted and return to be an attendee of the Zoom webinar. Written comments were also received and distributed to the committee members in advance of the meeting. Members of the public, city staff, and the media have the ability to view this meeting live through YouTube and Zoom webinar. The live stream can be accessed from most smartphones, tablets, or computers. For those watching on the live stream, thank you for joining us. Today's agenda contains both quasi-judicial and legislative matters. For that reason, I will be swearing in all members of the public and staff before the staff presentation and public comments. We'll now go on to agenda item A060. This is adopting text amendments to the Integrated Development Ordinance, paragraph 14 through 16 for the 2020 IDO annual update, including text amendments for small mapped areas. I move a do pass.
I'll second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson, with a second. We will begin with a staff presentation by Ms. Petra Morris. And it will be necessary for me at this point to swear in all staff. All staff members that may address the committee today, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
They do, and thank you. Ms. Morris, would you go forward with the presentation?
Madam Chair, councillors, thank you. I am just going to share my screen so that you guys can share with us this visualization. So to begin my presentation, just a short overview. This is the second IDO annual update. And this is the 2020, even though we're in 2021, this is the 2020 IDO annual update. Section 6.3D of the IDO calls for an annual process to update the IDO in order to ensure predictability and to ensure that the IDO remains an up-to-date and current document. The main form of communication for this annual update is the ABC to Z email list, which has over 10,000 recipients on it. We are about halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way through the process for this. This began with an EPC application. It began as 2 EPC applications. The first part was citywide text amendments, and the second part was small mapped area text amendments. Both of these applications were combined into the bill before us today, which is O2160, and the EPC recommendations are reflected in the exhibit to the bill. This exhibit has the citywide text amendments in red, and the small mapped areas are shown in blue. I've just realized my presentation says green, and I've been saying green to everybody for the past 3 months, and I must be colorblind because it is clearly blue. So my error there. EPC hearings, we've had 3 of them so far. We had the first one on January 21st. At this meeting, both the citywide and the small mapped area amendments were considered. The second hearing was on February 18th. At this one, it was just the small mapped area amendments. And then on March 4th, the EPC considered the citywide amendments and then made their recommendations. Last week on May 5th, we had the first LUPS presentation on this. We heard from the public, we heard from staff, councillors had an opportunity to ask any questions. There was a presentation on 18 amendments. And today, this is the second LUPS. Next steps in the process is really at the discretion of the councillors, more LUPS or onto full council. In the packets for today, there are two amendments that have been revised, A2 and A15. These were both revised for clarity. A2 is the Campground amendment and A15 is the technical edits. This is a spreadsheet with a number of line items that were ripples of putting together the red line document. When the planning department was putting together the red line document, there was some, imagine you throw a stone into a pond and the ripples come out. The EPC threw a number of stones into the pond and we didn't quite catch all the ripples with the EPC recommendations. And so these tech edits catch those ripples. There is also a new amendment in the packet tonight. That is Amendment A19. This is about some additional restrictions for cannabis uses. And then it is also worth noting that the amendments A3, A4, A12, and A19, so that's cannabis cultivation and manufacturing, cannabis distances, overnight shelter, and cannabis, the additional restrictions. I'll be available to answer any questions on them, do any discussion, but there is no intention to move these this evening, but they may be considered at the full council as a floor amendment. I have slides prepared to talk about each amendment as we come to it, if that is the discretion of the councils when it comes to that. So that is the end of my brief presentation about tonight and where we're at. So with that, I hand myself over for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Councilors, are there any questions? All right, let's move on then. Here are the public comment ground rules. Comments are to be addressed to the committee members only. Please keep your comments germane to the topics on the agenda, and any disruptive conduct or non-germane commentary will result in removal from the Zoom webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and each speaker will be given 4 minutes to provide public comment. Mr. Moya will start the timer once you begin speaking, then the Zoom moderator will let you know when your time is up. Mr. Moyo, please allow all speakers into our Zoom webinar, as speakers will need to be sworn in. We have a few speakers tonight, so it's going to take a while to get you all into the room.
That might be the starting the video.
We could ask Councillor Gibson to sing. It would make it a little more fun. Oops, she just shut herself off. Doesn't want to sing.
You don't want me to sing.
Okay, we don't want her to sing. I think we're getting close, everyone. Please be patient. This is much more difficult than just asking you to walk to the front of the room.
Madam Chair, for those that sign up to speak and are here attending the webinar, I've let everybody into the meeting room that is signed up to speak.
All right, that is good news. And since everyone has been let in who is here and has signed up to speak, I now need to swear you in. So would each of you please raise your right hand? Want to see you on TV? Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
I do.
Best of my knowledge, yes.
I do.
I didn't count, but I'm assuming you all said yes.
I
So
do.
thank you all. So Julian, would you please ask the speakers to turn off their camera and mute themselves until they're called on to speak? And then we will call out each speaker's name. Your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking. Thank you again all for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first speaker is Kathleen Monson, to be followed by Sabrina Smith. Ms. Monson, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Workday.
Sure, put my hand on a Bible, see if I really.
Hello, Council. My name is Kathleen Monson. I go by Katie. I'm here primarily regarding the new Cannabis Regulation Act. I'm not sure if many of the other people here tonight also have questions regarding that act and zoning for the city of Albuquerque. I had a few questions that I submitted via writing, and I also signed up to speak, so I guess I'll just go over those same questions. I'm not sure if you were given those prior to the meeting. My first question is, has the city appointed a contact person regarding cannabis dispensary zoning requirements and other cannabis industry related questions? And if so, what their contact information is? Has the council outlined the zoning requirements yet for cannabis dispensaries in the city of Albuquerque? This is my first city council meeting that I've attended via Zoom, so I'm not sure if you all have discussed that yet. I apologize if you are repeating information that you've already gone over. If you have gone over it, is it available online anywhere that we may be able to find? And if not, do you anticipate a future meeting date where you might review those zoning requirements? Regarding the zoning requirement questions, is there going to be a limit on cannabis retail licenses in Albuquerque? If so, how many licenses will you be permitting? Will there be cannabis, where will cannabis retailers be permitted to operate in the city of Albuquerque? So the specific zoning requirements. Does the location of the cannabis retail store have to be identified prior to the application for a license? Are there residency requirements for a license? And if so, what are they? And how will the application be processed? Will it be based on qualifications, or will it be a point-based or scored system as other states have used? Those are my questions, all pertaining to the cannabis industry. So if you have answers for me, I'd appreciate it, or appreciate being pointed in the correct direction.
Respond to that. Thank you very much, Ms. Munson, for your questions. And I'm going to respond, which I usually don't on these because we have so many people, but we'll be addressing some of that this evening and in future meetings. There will also direct you to, someone will get back to you and direct you to a website, and we'll also have the planning department get with you, give them your information so we can see if we can give you more, but we're still answering questions on all of that. So your question is very timely. So thank you for being here.
Our next speaker is Sabrina Smith. Please feel free to turn your video on and unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Hi, Council. My name is Sabrina Smith, and I am in support to amend the IDO to allow short-term stay locations within the city of Albuquerque. I am among one of the most fastest growing trends in the country called digital nomads. We are individuals who are able to work remotely using the internet and live their life on the road. I successfully make my living performing marketing and business media consulting for numerous clients in several different states. Since 2019, there has been a 49% increase in the digital nomad community, up almost 3.6 million from 2019. A point I can speak personally about is the difficulty we have in finding safe and convenient places to stay within city limits. Suitable RV parks in Albuquerque are in short supply and commonly full. This presents a hardship for us. Having short-term RV stays within the city of Albuquerque would allow others and myself to enjoy what the city has to offer and not be forced to pass through to the next rest area, completely passing Albuquerque.
We would rather be in proximity to friends and family and to be able to support local businesses. With COVID, this need has increased as more people have gone small and mobile. As businesses and recreational travel increases by RVs, the community will benefit in more ways than just one. The traveling community is strong with word of mouth and online forums. So when this amendment is passed, the word will spread and people will see the opportunity to visit Albuquerque for short-term stays and not have to continue on with their journey. So I hope you can see the opportunity this brings for the Albuquerque community, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Our next speaker is Dan Rich. Mr. Rich, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking. Mr. Rich, are you there?
I'm here. I didn't know I was being called. Am I on?
Yes, sir. Your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Glad to be back. I didn't quite finish last time, but I won't use the whole 4 minutes this time. I wanted to just respond to a couple comments made last week and just do my wind down that I didn't have a chance to do last week. What I wanted to say is short-term RV parks should not be thought of as undesirable. Rather, small, well thought out projects located in non-residential neighborhoods geared to short-term travelers. They should feel welcomed. And I'm talking about parks with well thought out design, nice landscaping, amenities offered that would be inviting to out-of-town guests. And there's kind of an ingrained image that people have of like trailer trash, or we don't want that in our neighborhood. But what is being proposed is a new concept for new times. And I think that there's a great need, and this would be an enhancement to our city that will bring favorable results. And that's basically what I want to add that I didn't have a chance to completely express last time. And I thank everybody for their attention.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. Our next speaker is Ms. Ward. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Counselors, please vote for A8, liquor and nicotine retail, and for A18, Northwest Mesa Escarpment View Protection Ordinance. For A8 and for 18. Please vote against A2, Campground and RV Park, against A10, MXL drive-through, and against A14, post-application facilitated meetings. Any proposed amendment using the temporary situation of the COVID-19 pandemic to justify permanent zoning or land use changes cannot be justified on that basis. So why were campgrounds and RV parks put in NRSU in the first place if they shouldn't be there? Which date is the effective date of this IDO for declaring primary permissiveness? If it refers to May 2018, then that should be the date in the ordinance. Would the proposed change lead to inconsistent permissiveness status within the same zone? The pandemic is not a justification for liberalizing frequently problematic drive-throughs. Please see the journal's Road Warrior columns from April 12th, April 26th, and May 3rd for broader community opinion on this. If I had a cynicism meter, surely it would be at 11. A14 further restrains the opportunity for public input by assuming there is timely and error-free notification. The SRMNA has experienced an ONC error that left it off a notification list. The error was corrected, but left the SRMNA without adequate time for facilitated meeting request and scheduling. Some of the remaining amendments have aspects needing further work or discussion. Special notes on A1, A13, and A15. Please support the removal of concreted and reinforced arroyos from the common open space calculation. There is debate on natural arroyos, and the amendment is mistitled as it does not define an arroyo, but defines common open space. Please remove references to Pnm or Public Service Company of New Mexico in the IDO. A private company's name should not appear in city ordinance, and the private company's plans should comply with the IDO, not the other way around. If there is a national standard to which both the IDO and private company should adhere, then reference the national standard. A15 puts forward substantive text amendments as technical amendments. This is misleading, and further discussion is needed. On A5, what is a daytime gathering facility that would be left uncovered by removal of this designation? I'm sorry, what is an example of a current daytime gathering facility that would be left uncovered by removal of this designation? Is the city simply saying that it does not want ordinances that apply to others to apply to it? My understanding is that zoning decisions were not supposed to be based on what could happen. This requires further clarification of intent and effect. On A6, the geographic responsiveness language to go in a goals or intent section as exists elsewhere in the IDO, for example, as done in protection overlays. A9, there appears to be textual errors in the proposed amendments with consecutive would occurrences. And what happens if the EPC denies the zone mapping amendment request? Have you tied yourself in a knot? And I forgot where I was. A12, agree with the concept, but I wonder if the limit is too high for a residential zone. Do you need to consider an upper limit of 6 if you also have to add bed numbers for staff? A13, I think I talked on that one already. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Fitzgerald. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking. Madam Chair, not seeing Ms. Fitzgerald in the room anymore. I'll go back to her if I see her come back.
Thank you.
So the next speaker will be Dr. Joe Valles. And Madam Chair, Dr. Valles was not in the room yet when you swore in the speaker, so you'll just have to swear him in before he starts his comments.
Thank you, I will.
He's ready.
All I have to do is find my swearing in. Got it. Dr. Valles,
Yes,
do you swear to tell the truth? Please raise your right hand and swear to tell the truth.
I swear to tell the truth, absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Valles.
Thank you. It's the time, I was on the wrong Zoom link, so I thank you for getting me on anyway. But anyway, first, I want to greet you all again, and I want to express to Councilor Pena my deep frustration with the possible arson at the Pat Baca Community Center, knowing how hard the community and leaders coalesce to make that a reality. Next, I would like to recommend that proposed amendment A6 to the original geographic responsiveness be pulled from the packet. It's unnecessary in my opinion, and it sends the wrong message. We should try to preserve as much of Albuquerque's uniqueness as possible. I also recommend strongly that we continue to protect the Coors Boulevard View Protection Overlay, or VPO. I hope you won't buy into Mr. Strozier's notion that only the view of the Sandia Mountains is valid. His argument that because Coors is not a straight north-south corridor, it is caused to eliminate 45 degrees from the deviations of north-south. Please protect the Coors corridor. Next, I'd like to just address a little something on the C2 and C3 conversions in the IDO. During the IDO zoning conversion process, C2 and C3 zones were converted to the NRC district on the west side. C2 became MXM and C3 became MXH on the east side. New amendments have changed or proposed to change the IDO to allow uses in MXM as conditional on the east side, but are permissive with the NRC on the west side. So in general, NRC is allowing nuisance uses for more liberally than the MXM zone. The RV park amendment, for example, currently before you, it's proposed as conditional for MXM on the east side, but permissive for NRC on the west side. How were both C2 and C3 put together to make the NRC district on the west side? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem equitable. And I think that should be corrected or at least adamantly explained. And so for that, I thank you. I don't know what the time limit is, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Valles.
Madam Chair,
Councillor Benton.
could we have staff address the last issue of the difference between the conversions east and west of the river?
Yes, thank you. We'll ask Ms. Morris to address that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes. So with the adoption of the IDO, MXM was the conversion from C2. MXM, all C2 throughout the city, east side or west side, converted to MXM. However, the C3 zone converted to either the NRC zone district or the MXH zone district. That depended on the conditions in the area. However, on the west side, there was a push for more of the C3 to convert to NRC than MXH in order to preserve the commercial properties on the west side. We know that there is a big jobs to housing imbalance between the east side and the west side. And so when MXH zoning came in, we were concerned that people would use the residential component of that mixed use zone district if it was on the west side, and that potentially we would lose a lot of commercial properties and employment opportunities on the west side. This A2 amendment has the MXM zone district, which is on both the east and west sides of the city as a conditional use. MXM, as the old C2, is pretty close to a lot of residential, and so that's why it's proposed as conditional. NRC, when it does occur on the west side, is generally away from residential. It's the old C3, so it's pretty heavy and intense. A lot of these are old business and industrial parks. And so the NRC that exists on both the east and the west side would have, if this amendment were to pass, campground and RVs as a permissive use in the NRC and in the NRBP.
Madam Chair, thanks for the update. Appreciate that. You reminded me of that whole discussion. Yeah, so it was a policy call in that sense of the trying to address jobs housing imbalance. All right. I didn't see anybody say no. Thank you, Madam President. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Borrego, do you have a question?
I do have a question of Mr. Valles. Good afternoon, Mr. Valles.
How are you?
Or Dr. Valles, rather.
Joe's good.
I had a question on A6, geographic responsiveness.
Right.
Could you further elaborate on, are you in support of this or not in support of this?
I'm in support of the original amendment, not in support of A6.
Okay. All right. Because I was a little confused by which comment you were referring to. So.
Yeah, I get confused with the IDO all the time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Borrego. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Peter Kalitzus. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Hello, I'm Peter Kalitzus. Thank you for allowing me to speak again, and I appreciate the 4 minutes, so I hope to keep it shorter. As I submitted some written comments and some verbal comments I said last week, I hope that they get addressed. My comments were relating to A12 overnight shelter and A5 daytime gatherings. The quick one I'll say is the A5 daytime gathering facilities. I don't know if it's good or bad. My question that I had, and hopefully Ms. Morris, it sounds like she's a great resource for these answers as far as where these are covered in other areas of the IDO. Okay, and regarding A12 overnight shelter, my biggest question actually has to do with what parts are you looking at to be conditional or permissive, or are they all going to be permissive? I love the idea of this being prescriptive, giving many zones opportunities. We need the shelter so much. And hopefully this will also cover the situation similar to Denver with the tent structures, because to be able to put this throughout the city, provide much more housing that's not severe impact to a neighborhood, I think is great. So you have my comments from last week. I asked them to be part of the record. So if my request to that, my request, and maybe Ms. Morris can answer it, is A12, what parts is you looking at, conditional, permissive, or both? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kalitzus. Next speaker, please.
Hey, Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Gibson. You guys are going to have to wave more. I'm not being, you're too small. There's so many little tiny faces on here.
So I would really appreciate giving Ms. Morris a chance to respond to Mr. Kalitz's comments, please.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. Ms. Morris, would you like to respond to those comments?
Madam Chair, councillors, yes. So the first question was about daytime gathering. So as drafted in the IDO, daytime gathering is very broad. It would cover an accountant who offers tax preparation services at a discount. It would cover a medical clinic that offers reduced fee care, for example, Planned Parenthood. It would cover city community center. It was not intended to cover such a broad swath of spaces. It was, as drafted, really intended to cover services that were providing assistance to the homeless population during the day, so not overnight. But if we were to revise the definition to say things that are happening during the day for the homeless, will end up in court. And we will end up being told that we're discriminating. And so as phrased, the daytime gathering is not enforceable. And then to rephrase it, to revise it would get us in trouble. And so amendment A5, the daytime gathering, proposes to strike this reference to this throughout the IDO. It's a conditional use currently in the IDO in a number of zones. It's not permissive in any of the zones. And it has a separation distance associated with overnight shelters. Striking this could possibly allow some overnight shelters in places that would have been too close to what was considered a daytime gathering. But that's something that will have to come with some language, unfortunately, we have that's not viable. The overnight shelter amendment, this one, I believe Councillor Davis has asked us to talk about but not vote on. The overnight shelter use in the IDO is conditional in every zone district. Is conditional only in a handful of zone districts, but not permissive in any. It's conditional in the MXH zone districts, the NRC zone district, the NRBP zone district, the NRLM, and the NRGM zone district. This amendment would add bed capacities to those. Overnight shelter is also part of a religious institution. There's a federal level act called RLUIPA that tells governments around the country that they cannot interfere with how a church pursues their mission. And helping those who are needy is the mission of a number of churches. And so overnight shelters are considered an incidental use within a religious facility. The other thing that RLUIPA talks about, and Chris is on the call if I get too close into legal stuff and misspeak, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but RLUIPA also tells us that we have to allow churches to operate. And so churches are in every zone district in the city. And so for that reason, this amendment has bed capacity depending on the zone district you're in case that the overnight shelter is part of the incidental church use. And so that is why there are overnight bed spaces in zones that just a regular overnight shelter wouldn't be allowed. And I think that was all of the questions.
Conditional versus permissive.
Yes. Religious institutions are permissive in all zones. Overnight shelters are conditional in some zones.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate all your comments. Thank you, sir. Councilor Pena, I see that you have your hand up. Councilor Pena? Let's go on with our next speaker, and if we find Councilor Pena, we'll ask her if she has any comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for that.
Councilor Pena's back. Go ahead, please.
I apologize. I was actually just going to say that, not related to this, but Dr. Valles, I was going to ask to bring him back into the, hold on one second. To bring Dr. Valles back in because he felt like the question on East-West wasn't adequately answered. So if we can pull him back in, I would appreciate it.
Dr. Valles, I see you're back in the chat room. Councilor Pena, do you have a question or a comment for Dr. Valles?
Yes. Dr. Valles, I was just wanting you to elaborate on your question you felt that wasn't completely answered. You're on mute.
Dr. Valles, you are muted.
Am I muted now?
You're fine. You're on. Thank you.
I'm on. Okay, thanks. Councilor Pena, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're on.
Yes, so I can hear you.
Okay. It just doesn't seem right. Something doesn't seem right about the conversions of C2 and C3 zones. And I'm just not sure why there are more allowances with the zoning for the west side than there are for the east side with those particular conversions, and why there's so much of it. I don't know if that makes sense.
So if Petra, maybe you can elaborate a little more. I know it's, lots of it's based on the jobs to housing imbalance, but I don't think that really satisfied Dr. Joe's.
Well, it's not about really just satisfying Dr. Joe. I think it's giving an explicit and fair explanation about why it is that somebody decided to mark up the west side differently than the east side, particularly when you're applying specific zoning. That's my problem. But I'm not the only one concerned about that. There's others.
Councilor Pena, Dr. Joe, if it's all right with you, since this is public comment and not question and answer, may we bring this up when we come back to the item on the agenda?
Of course.
Thank you, Dr. Valles. Councilor Pena?
Sure. Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Thank you all. We'll go with the next speaker then, please.
Our next speaker is Heather Hoffman. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good evening, Ms. Hoffman.
Good evening. First of all, thank you, counselors, for taking the time to hear from me today. I greatly appreciate it. My name is Heather Hoffman, and I'm the Executive Director with Barrett Foundation, also known as Barrett House Shelter. My comments are in relation to Amendment A12, a proposal to restrict shelter beds per zoning type. While I think and hope there's going to be a lot more information to follow on this particular proposal, I'd like to impart these two particular points for the purpose of today's conversation. First, I have great concern about the message that the council and the city would be sending to our community at large if we try to relegate human beings to industrial areas for shelters over 100 beds. It feels really questionable to me at best to tell and show our community that we are pushing our fellow human beings in need of safety, shelter, and support into a zoned industrial area. For this to be the only space where we would allow larger shelters, I feel we're sending the message that we're devaluing these particular humans and have no trust in them. This doesn't feel on par with the mayor's platform to work to truly address and reduce homelessness, as opposed to simply trying to hide it. Secondly, in the face of the ongoing economic crisis, with the recognition that our community's most vulnerable population is being disproportionately affected, I can't imagine that this is the right time to restrict shelter space, to keep local shelters from growing to meet the need in our community, and possibly even reducing our current capacity. It seems likely we're only going to add to the problem with this blanket answer to a very nuanced problem. I'd hope very much that Barrett Foundation in particular would be invited to further discussions on this proposal as solutions are being sought out. I absolutely appreciate what a huge topic homelessness is, and I appreciate the efforts that the city and the council are taking on to solve this very daunting issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Councilors, any questions? Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. We appreciate your being here.
Our next speaker is Eleanor Walther. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
I'm Eleanor Walther, and I'm president of the Rio Grande Boulevard Neighborhood Association. And we oppose the red line in the IDO that allows cottage development as a conditional use outside the UCMSPT zone. Lots of lots in the North Valley or a quarter acre, so we think this severely impacts us. And we wonder if it doesn't lead to de facto duplex and townhouse development where it's not allowed now. We also oppose in A14 the reducing from 15 days to 10 days to ask for a facilitated meeting. And also the IDO doesn't specify whether that's business days or calendar days. And in general, we oppose amendments that are have come about because some problems have arisen to COVID. We certainly would like to see that this behavior continues after we're out of lockdowns and truly is a change in people's behavior. And with cottage development, part of our problem is that I don't know of, and I frankly don't know how to find out if any cottage development has been approved on these 10,000 square foot lots, but it's very hard for us to envision what that will look like. And so if we could keep where it's currently allowed and see some built, that would ease our minds greatly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walter. I see no questions. We'll move on to the next speaker. Thank you, ma'am.
Our next speaker is Dan Regan. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good evening, Mr. Regan.
I think I'm unmuted. Good evening.
You
Madam
are indeed
Chair,
unmuted. Thank you.
Madam Chair and LUFS members. I am with District 4 Coalition and the Nap Heights Neighborhood Association. The agenda for today's meeting still carries the fact that speakers will have 2 minutes or less. I'm not sure when it went to 4. I'm not complaining about it, but it's rather arbitrary because I had to whittle down 2 minutes and 15 seconds to 2 minutes. Having these council amendments considered on the same level of public awareness and vetting as the amendments which passed through the IDO is bad governance, pure and simple. It is damaging to this city that you were elected to guide wisely. At least 4 of the council amendments are being drugged back into existence after being rejected by the planning staff and the EPC. So I'm wondering which and whose constituency is demanding passage by any means possible. Amendment 6, in its original wholeness, was approved by the EPC and recommended to the council for passage. It is based on solid and extensive collaboration between senior planning managers in consultation with senior and retired architects, community consultants, and neighborhood association leadership. I wonder, Councilor Benton, if you were in contact with the architects that participated in those consultations to understand their thinking on putting in the geographical responsiveness section. The reasons offered for striking the geographical responsiveness section are bogus straw person rationales, which reject a number of the aspirational goals of the comp plan. Again, the question of which constituency is playing the tune to this jig arises in my mind. Amendment 10, another council amendment that was thoroughly considered by the EPC and was rejected as written. This amendment purposefully denies public input from the very residents who will be most impacted. Nearby residents will not be permitted to have any say in these drive-throughs, which will endanger pedestrians at busy locations. The favored constituents in this matter are clearly not these tax-paying residents who live nearest to the drive-throughs. You have my written comments from last week. I ask you to incorporate them into my spoken comments today. You heard last week that homeowners are selling their properties and moving elsewhere because of the way the IDO is being implemented by the city council. Keep fiddling, and I think you'll see more of that happening to the detriment of our city. I thank you for this opportunity at one-way communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. We appreciate you. And I just want to remind you and the listeners that the EPC is a recommending body and not a voting body. So thank you, sir, for your comments, and we appreciate your attending and your concern.
Our next speaker is Will Gleason. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councilors.
Good evening, Mr. Gleason. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for all your time and effort on this. And I want to speak specifically about the CPO 12 and speaking, this is for Sawmill. I submitted a letter today on behalf of Heritage Hotels from Susie Lubar and Jim Long. The basic issue that concerns Heritage Hotels is the application of residential design standards to the area immediately surrounding Hotel Chaco and Sawmill Market. So while we support one of the amendments to the character protection overlay zone, which designates the area in which some of those design standards apply, I believe it's still not really clear as to whether the residential design standards apply to the entire character protection overlay zone. So we would appreciate if you could help clarify that, and whether that is in this round of amendments or a subsequent one. I believe that would really help that area to develop to its full potential. And specifically, I think that if you exclude some of those very specific residential small scale character design standards from the MXM and MXH zones, along with the NRLM, that would that would go a long way towards addressing this issue. And again, I appreciate your time. And overall, I really do support the IDO, and I think it has helped move forward the quality and reliability of decisions in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gleason, and thank you for being here. Our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Jane Beckel. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start.
Good evening, Ms. Beckel.
Good evening. Thank you. Madam Chair and councilors, I wanted to comment on 3 items. First is addressing the importance of the view protection overlays to the west side. The views from the west side are probably some of its most significant and valuable assets. In previous public and written comments, I've spoken to my support for the Northwest Mesa VPO. And today I want to also comment specifically on support for the Coors Boulevard VPO. Like Dr. Joe, I think it is not accurate to state that the only relevant or important view along Coors Boulevard is that of the crest or the ridge top of the mountains. It is actually the entire view. And if you look at existing development along Coors, the majority of which does comply with current height restrictions, the views are not only of the crest and the ridgetop, but also of some of the mountain face, and in some cases of the trees in the bosque. So I think it's not accurate to conclude that there is a choice between development or views. In fact, protecting the views improves the value of the development as well. The second item I wanted to comment on is also to state that, like a previous speaker, I think the reduction of the time allotted to requesting a facilitated meeting from 15 days to 10 is not appropriate. That assumes that even if it's an administrative matter, that doesn't mean that it is either straightforward or that it is not largely terribly impactful on the people who would be involved. I think it's important to allot a 15-day period to request a facilitated meeting so that all interested parties can do so and be prepared. And finally, I want to go briefly to another item, and that is the formation of a dedicated food truck courts or defined food truck courts. I noticed in that there are requirements for hand sanitation and permission to provide tables and chairs and umbrellas. That suggests to me that people are not picking up food and leaving. And if people are going to be staying in that area as a public health measure, toilet facilities should be required. To fail to do that, I think, raises the possibility that adjacent properties will have to deal with waste issues, basically. So those are 3 points I would like to make. There are others that I've submitted in written comments, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being here this evening.
Our next speaker is Kathy Adams. Please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. And
thank you so much for being here this evening, Ms. Adams. Thank you.
I just have to say that every time I come to these meetings, especially when we're given a little bit more time, I learn things that I would not have learned otherwise. And isn't that the purpose of public meetings, so that we have a chance to learn from each other? And so I'm not going to comment on specific things today. I'm going to kind of highlight the public's frustration with this process. I have been an active participant in the IDO process since 2015. I did attend large meetings and I worked with small groups. I was opposed to the adoption of the IDO in 2017. I think many of us were. We felt it was rushed, and we felt that it was rushed purposefully before our new mayor had a chance to take office. As a result of that rush, I think we're dealing with huge amounts of necessary changes and amendments. But this amendment process is flawed. We need more opportunity to talk to people. We need to have questions answered. How many times have we stopped this evening to say, tell us more? And we need to have meetings that allow us to interact. This process allows no opportunity for genuine citizen input at the committee level. I do have to thank members in the staff members in the planning department because they have made themselves available to work with us and answer questions. On your part, there is not a systematic or timely schedule that allows all interested parties to meet, review, discuss. You should be actively engaging and actively encouraging citizens. Your work could be better informed by more interaction. We are concerned about transparency because we are not invited to participate in general information or hear you discuss changes. We cannot always trust the final outcome. We need to know more. We would like to see more effort dedicated to make information more easily available. We want to know the reasoning behind proposed changes. We want to know the data that supports the need for changes. You could be organizing meetings. You could have Zoom sessions where we could watch people like Petra Morris speak. You could record it and have that recording available. You could have Zoom meetings for that are more interactive. So I urge you all to make a more concerted effort to make this process more user-friendly and more transparent. Thank you, and help us see that you want the best for Albuquerque, just like we want the best for Albuquerque.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Councillor Gibson, I see you have a question or comment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I would just like to say once again, this was stated in our last LUPS meeting, why there's been fairly short turnaround on this IDO amendment. And that's because council only got it from the mayor's office not that long ago. So that's the first comment. That's the first point that I want to make. And the other thing that I think needs to be said and repeated over time in a public meeting like this, that we don't get together and talk about the IDO amendments. We do get briefings from staff, which are very, very helpful. But there's nothing that, we're held by the Open Meetings Act, so that we can't, for example, get more than 4 counselors together anyway, without appearing to go afoul of the Open Meetings Act, which we're really painfully aware of all the time, I might add. So that's not happening either. So I understand your frustration, Ms. Adams, and I'm sorry for that. I truly am. But, we kind of share a little bit of that frustration as well. We're doing the best we can. So if you have like specific questions, we will, answer them the best that we can. We have 2 very capable planners on our staff. That's really all I have to say, but I'm glad she came in. I'm glad she said what she said, and I hope that what I have said helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gibson. And Councillor Benton has a question.
Yeah, just more of a response again. I think we have a record at the LUPS committee of our staff being available to the public to answer their questions. Of course, yeah, it's always more difficult with COVID and so forth, but they do remain available, as do the planning department staff. But of course, it is now in our court. And speaking of which, just to reiterate, this has been a long process of this update. It got off schedule for various reasons last year, but now it's here. It did go through the EPC. That is a public hearing process, but as was stated, it's a recommending body, and they didn't make a decision. They commented on each of the items. And then after EPC sends it on, it should be kind of a pro forma turnaround where, okay, we've got the cover letters and everything, and we send it to the council. But in this case, there was a long delay, and that's not okay. We've got to do better than that in the future in order to have adequate public comment. And so I just wanted to say that there's been no intention here of like pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. And if there are specific, when things come out of the EPC, if there's an upswell of community support for them, we do need to hear about that, at that time and before it comes to us, so that we do have that input. So anyway, just a process thing, but understandably, it was an unusual year, so hopefully we can get on track.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. And our next speaker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next speaker is Renee Horvath. Ms. Horvath, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good evening, Ms. Horvath.
Good afternoon.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Yes, it's beautiful outside. And I do want to thank you for extending the time to 4 minutes. It's a lot better and a step in the right direction. And I do have a lot to say because I was up till 3 looking at all this stuff and trying to send my comments in by 1 o'clock. So yeah, and I do agree with the speakers on process. We do need to improve them. And I've always wanted to talk to you, counselors, about some of your proposals to understand where you're coming from and give you my side of things, because I see a lot of things here that don't work out very well and like to communicate that with you. So one of the first ones that I've always been a little concerned about is the college development being on a 10,000 square foot lot. Because my dad's house is a Mossman house on a 10,000 square foot lot, and I can't imagine putting 3 houses on that lot. I can just see it would look very cluttered. I've seen neighborhoods in Albuquerque on the southwest side, in the Northeast Heights, where you can put 3 houses on a 10,000 square foot area, and the whole subdivision is like that, and it looks very cluttered. There's not enough parking. There's no place for the kids to play. And so I think we could get a better design with cottage if we had a little more discussion and review about it, so we're all on the same page. Secondly, the view regulations along Coors. This is why we've been so concerned about getting rid of our sector plans. I think we're kind of getting away from the intent of preserving the views along Coors. And I'd like to see us go back to the original language of the Coors plan and the pictures to demonstrate what we're trying to achieve. Also, getting into the 18 newest amendments, the Arroyo definition for common open space, that needs some work too, because I see cluster development could be a great design tool, but you need to have 30% open space to be the buffer around the sensitive areas. And they should not include things like acequias, ditches, waterways, arroyos, rivers, floodways, wetlands, steep slopes, escarpments, sandy bluffs. Those are pretty much off limits. You're not going to develop on those. They're not a fair exchange of common open space in order to reduce your lots. And so I think we need to look at that a little more and try to get that definition where we all support it. Let's see, campgrounds, RV parks. Okay, I've been driving around the city to get a sense of what these RV parks look like. I usually find that they're in light industrial areas or near business parks or adjacent to mobile home parks. And it's possible that we could find the right zoning for it. Right now you got it for NRC zones. Possibly some of them could work. especially if they're kind of in a light industrial or business park area or away from the residents. I don't see RV parks adjacent to residents. There's usually a separation, at least by a street, but even more separation than that. So I think we could come up with something, but I think that needs more review. I'm glad you're looking at the cannabis to look at more review. The geographic responsiveness, taking advantage of the views of Albuquerque I would encourage developers to do that, because I think that's the greatest asset that we have in Albuquerque, and it would be a amenity to the people living there. Okay, drive-throughs, yes, they weren't appropriate in neighborhood centers, which was C1 zone, which is now MXL.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. Your time
Oh,
is up.
well, can I say one thing? I do support the last one, A18, Northwest Mesa BPO. I wanted to get that in.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. We appreciate your
Madam
comment.
Chair, can I ask that she finish?
Thank you, Councilor Borrego.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think it's very important because the Mesa Top is an important feature, just like the mountains and the river is, and we need to design it carefully. And I think that's what this amendment is doing, to limit the building heights, because you on the east side of town are going to be looking this way to look at the beautiful sunset, the volcanoes, and the Mesa. So we need to design it so you still enjoy those views. And I think that it's appropriate to limit the building heights and the type of uses that you have in the area, because we do have the Petroglyph National Monument. That is one of our greatest assets. So we need to show the world that we care about this place and want to do more to preserve it.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. We appreciate your comments. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Pat Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Well, doesn't look like I have a video. Can you hear me okay?
Good evening, Mr. Gallagher. We can hear you.
Okay. Madam Chair, councilors, my name is Pat Gallagher. My comments are in reference to the VPO1, the Coors View Protection Overlay, and a little very unnoticed paragraph in there allows variances. And we've discovered over the years that any kind of variation in a view protection zone can be disastrous. It's not like in the rest of town where you have moving a curb cut over a foot. If you move anything in the view protection overlay zone, you can end up with a real problem, and usually will. When the Coors Corridor Plan was initiated, we specifically made sure that they kept no variances in there. But when the IDO came through, somehow this paragraph crept its way back in there and kind of was stuck at the end of the VPO1 and sort of unnoticed. So it's been there since 17. And now it really is a time when it needs to come out, because I'm afraid that each one of the developments is looking for any kind of loophole they can find. And this loophole is big enough to drive a truck through it. And so if you could take out this 1416.3 3-6D8, it would be extremely helpful, and it shouldn't have been there in the first place. And oh, by the way, I wanted to thank the planning staff for the really good and helpful work they did on reworking the VPO1. There was a lot of new stuff in there, and it's greatly appreciated. And it was appreciated that we got to work with them on doing that. But please make it a condition that this paragraph goes away, because it will absolutely ruin the VPO1 at some point in time.
Madam Chair, could you ask him to repeat what section he's asking to take out?
Sure, it's 1416.3, of course, and it's 3-6, D as in dog, 8 is the paragraph. Is that good?
Councilor Borrego, any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Peggy Neff. Ms. Neff, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 4 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon, counselors, planning staff, community members. I keep my video off to represent the people who cannot get on to these calls. Yes, thank you for the additional time. I appreciate that. And I too would like to thank the planning staff for their commitment to attempt to answer questions and address public comment. I believe that the IDO amendment process is crooked. I believe it's askew. It's slanted to the idea that we need to have growth at all costs in Albuquerque. I have found that it favors developers and insiders who have a direct line to council staff and those people who will draft their interest into amendments. It denies due process and it promotes abuses of the Open Meetings Acts. Of the 600,000 residents in Albuquerque, less than 100 have been involved in these amendments. You have my comments. I still stand against the drive-throughs and the campgrounds becoming permissive uses across the city. We did a quick review on this. RV parks that are open are not full. There are lots of Airbnb options that have parking on the streets. These are visitors to our community. We shouldn't be making plans that take away from residents and favor visitors. Doesn't make sense to me. I agree with the comment made this afternoon regarding Pnm. I wish this person who was commenting had had time to review the 102 amendments instead of just the most recent 18. We all would have a clearer understanding of the incongruencies and the brokenness of the IDO. To reiterate some of the specifics, I disagree that toilet facilities shouldn't be included at primary use food truck lots. It just makes no sense to me to have 7 food trucks on a lot where you have no bathroom facilities. I have suggested changes to the overnight shelter amendment, but have had no feedback to those suggestions and don't see them incorporated here. I do not support the changes in common open space. In the current trend of growth at all costs, we can expect to see 100% of common open space being used for sensitive lands. We should just get rid of common open space and write clear guidelines to protect both our sensitive lands, and we should make sure that usable open space is required for all cluster, cottage, and multifamily housing plans. I agree with the EPC recommendation that light vehicle sales be restricted along mass transit routes and at activity centers. I agree with Councilor Benton's comment from last week that there needs to be a way to enforce geographical responsiveness. I don't see an amendment of this nature, but I don't think we should throw out the good part of a positive amendment. I disagree that we should narrow this I disagree that we should narrow the notification process. Just a note here, I'm echoing this comment from another community member who could not get on to public comment because she missed the deadline. I disagree that we need to push the calendar for these amendments through. We don't need to push any calendar. There's nothing here that is restricting any growth except for your personal interests. Anyway, in fact, I think that we should only be amending the amendment process. I think it's difficult to go into different Zoom meetings. I think that technology is improving, but the fact that we can't even read through these and discuss them together, that's something more difficult that you need to address. I believe the Albuquerque community has not been consulted, and I think this is wrong. The comments coming from Katie strike at the core of the current systemic, administratively sanctioned abuse of our right of deliberation on the laws that affect us. She asked basic questions that just made me cringe. Imagine that public comment and public feedback would be fully recognized in the IDO process.
Ms. Neff, thank you. Your time is up, Ms. Neff. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
And the next speaker.
Madam Chair, that concludes public comments.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here this evening. We appreciate it. So first we will go to agenda item A060, which is adopting text amendments. Councilor Benton, would you like to move this legislation?
It's already on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's already on the floor. I have too many notes tonight. So let's move on. Councilor Morris, Ms. Morris, I believe you have a presentation about this.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, I have a slide per amendment, which I can bring out. I can do a very short summary on what each amendment is. And then if you have any questions for me, then I can address those and then you guys can have your deliberations and vote. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect, Ms. Morris.
Great. Okay. Amendment A1. This is the arroyo definition. This amendment adds concrete or reinforced arroyos to the areas that cannot be considered common open space in a cluster development. Common open space definition refers to sensitive lands, and the sensitive lands list includes arroyos. The common open space is intended to be the area on a lot that predates the development on the lot, and this is the area on the lot that should be preserved.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. And Councilor Borrego, would you like to move Amendment A1?
Actually, before we move the amendments, Councilor, I would like to make a motion to defer all of our discussion to another LUPS meeting, because I think that there are a number of questions that still have not been answered regarding many of these amendments. And I would point out issues related to view quarters, issues related to cannabis, issues related to day time gatherings and overnight shelters. I think there are substantial questions, and I think this allows the public to have additional time to take a look at all of the amendments. So I would like to make a motion to defer the entire bill.
Councilor Borrego has made a motion to defer the entire LUPS bill for this evening.
And we could defer to June if possible.
Councilor Borrego, would you like to make it a full motion of when, so that what we're voting on is in fact a real motion?
Yes, it would be our first meeting in June, and I don't have the date in front of me.
So let me repeat that and make sure I have it. Your motion is to defer this LUPS meeting and all associated motions or business in it until the first LUPS meeting in June. Is that correct?
Correct.
Which is June 14th. Okay, are there any seconds on that? Councilor Pena, I see your hand is up. Is that a second? Yes, Councilor Pena has had a second. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Councilor Gibson, you have your hand up.
Yes, Madam Chair. So mine is a question, and so whether or not we defer, let's say for the purpose of this question, let's assume we do not defer. So it would come out of this, if it was passed out of this committee, it would go to our very next meeting of the full council. Would it have to go through 2 council meetings?
Actually, Councilor, let me stand corrected. I think that it would be appropriate to defer to a June LUPS meeting, at which time we can answer some of the questions that came up from the public today. I think that would be appropriate, and we could still hear it in June at our second June council meeting.
Okay, well, excuse me for interrupting, but I would just like to get staff some guidance on this, just for the sake of this question. If it should be voted out of committee today, what council meeting would it go to, and how many council meetings would we need to have?
Councilor Gibson, I'm going to ask Petra to answer that question for us. Thank you for asking. And then Councilor Benton, you're next.
Madam Chair, councillors, if the IDO were to leave LUPS today, it would be reported out on May 17th, which is Monday, and then it would be heard at the first June meeting, which I believe is June 7th, and then the second meeting in June, which would be June 21st. The IDO has no requirement on the number of meetings, but that would give us 2 council meetings before the July recess. If the IDO were deferred to the June 14th LUPS, in order to be heard at the June 21st City Council meeting, it would need immediate action. And it would also give us only 1 City Council meeting in June before the July recess. And so if the councillors wanted to have 2 City Council meetings on this topic, it would need to be heard in August, which means that the bill would go into effect in September. There's a 1-month effective period in order to address the enrolling and engrossing and other sort of technical aspects of putting the document together and getting the bill published. This would lead us to about a month between the IDO going into effect and the October submittal date for the next IDO annual update.
I see. Okay, thank you, Ms. Morris. So I don't think I'm leaning against deferral, and let me just tell you why. We've had 2 meetings on this before. We have also amassed a few questions that I believe that Ms. Morris and Ms. Schultz are very capable of answering. Are we putting anything like this up on a website, Ms. Morris? Are we, or have we done that this time? I know we've used that as a tool in the past, but maybe not this time.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, this is on the ABC to Z website, and then whenever anything new is added to the website, an email goes out to the ABC to Z email list, which I believe has about 10,000 email recipients on it.
So what about answers? Excuse me, 1 second, please. One more question, and that is, are we also putting up responses to questions on the ABC to Z website?
Madam Chair, Councillor Gibson, we haven't responses to public comment.
Okay.
No, we share the public comment with the councillors, and then if the councillor wants us to respond to the public comment in the form of amendments, then new amendments would be crafted. That's generally how we respond to public comment. Okay. And so eventually the response goes on in the form of an amendment, yes, but not a Q&A spreadsheet or anything like that.
Okay, well, that might be a little bit of improvement, so that if somebody missed the question the first time, they wouldn't need to answer it a second time if they did have a place to go to. But anyway, so I'm still, let me just say this, I'm still leaning against a little bit on the deferral, because, you know, with 2 more council meetings ahead of us to hear this, I think we're going to have a lot more time, and in answering our emails from constituents. So
Thank
that's
you.
where I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Benton, and then Councillor Borrego.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask Ms. Morris, I think I heard you correctly. If the council were not to act on this before the July break, it would not go into effect under the best of circumstances until when?
Madam Chair, councillors, it would, if the councillors acted in August, there's a 30-day effective period, and so it would go into effect in September. So if it was early August, it would go into effect early September. If it was late or mid-August, mid to late September, and it is early October, I believe, or maybe it's the end of, it's sometime in October for the EPC submittal for the next IDO annual update application.
And when are we going to be back on track with the annual? So this is the 20. We've still got to do the 21. Should we be? I know that this type of schedule was built into the IDO, right?
Madam Chair, councillors, this year we are hoping would be the first year that we get on track. So the IDO builds in an annual update process, and the idea is that the update goes in at the end of the year so that you have a year of collecting information. Once we're really in the thick of the CPAs, the intent is that most of the amendment process is the information that comes out of the CPA process. And so by having the application submitted in October, that would mean that the first hearing would be in December. So you'd still get an EPC hearing within the year of the annual update, but you would have a whole year to collect that information through the CPA process.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to be very parochial on this vote because one of the planning area process at the end of this year is within my district, and I want that process to be informed. If we keep kicking the can down the road, then we don't, then there's still, people are still focused on basically the past, which is what this year in which we've been trying to catch up. I know I would rather, that our constituents have all the information about what has happened so far. And, yes, some of these amendments have been around for a while, even though I think the cannabis originally, I was involved in that early on when Councilor Davis was not able to do it. But there's been a lot of discussion about this. And yes, the community planning assessment process is everyone's ability to weigh in on this stuff. So it's not really, I don't think it would be practical given the size of the council staff and the process that preceded us receiving this, for us to somehow have time for whatever it would be, months, it's always going to be a need for more questions to be answered. That will never stop. But we've got to keep some sort of schedule in order to have the whole process of community assessments be effective. So I can't support this. It is a shame that we had to push it so quickly. And we won't comment anymore on why that is. But nonetheless, this is where we are, and there's a lot of work to be done, and kicking the can down the road is not going to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. And Councilor Borrego, you're next.
Well, if I can convince the counselors, I heard more than 2-3 people today speak about the process and their concerns with the process. And I think a couple of weeks is not going to, change anything. We could still act on this at our June 21st council meeting. If we take the time now to look at the technical amendments a lot more closely, it's possible that we could come to some better consensus, and we could simply pass it in June and still implement it fairly early. So implementing it, she said 30 days after it's adopted, it would still be adopted in July. So I don't see any reason that we could not defer it and look a little more closely at some of these amendments, get a little bit more buy-in from the public, and move forward with it at our July hearing. And if we did that, we probably wouldn't need more than one city council meeting to adopt it.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. I just want to remind the councilors and Councilor Borrego that we have no meetings in the month of July. So if
I said it would be adopted. It's 30 days after it's approved. So if it was approved June 21st, Madam Chair, then it would be adopted in either early August or late July.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Are there any other comments? There is a motion on the floor to defer this until when? This meeting? Until June 14th. All those, let's take a roll on this, can we, please?
Absolutely.
Point of order, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
Councilor Benton.
Point of order. Okay, so this would conclude our discussion of the rest of these. How does that serve? I mean, don't we want to go through?
I would think
the
so, but
motion to defer would conclude this meeting. Am I wrong? Or this topic in the meeting?
I
Chris?
would think that that's true. Mr. Melendres.
Madam President, Madam Chair, councilors, yes, the motion to defer is a precedential motion that's articulated in our rules and general practice. And so if this motion passes, you would have no further business on this item today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Melendres. The public wants to hear what we have to say about this, councilors. And I think we need to conclude this meeting and see at that point whether something needs to change, I guess. But this has been duly advertised. May I ask one question, another question of staff, which would be to Ms. Moore, is the bulk of these amendments before us have been out in the public for how long?
Madam Chair, councillors, the bulk of these are a ripple from the Environmental Planning Commission. They're a response to the discussion, so it's a continuation of an ongoing conversation. The 3 cannabis amendments, there is no intention to move any of those tonight. Those are all new, and they're new because the state had the New Mexico Cannabis Regulations Act passed during the spring session. And then Overnight Shelter, which is also a new one, Councillor Davis has also requested that one, if there's discussion or questions about it, that be discussed, but it not be moved.
Right, so both of those by definition are not going to be part of this package. I'm not ruling out that we could discuss a deferral after we hear everything, but I really think it's not serving anyone for us to just stop. And by the way, another point of order, we're not supposed to be answering questions from the general public comments. I mean, that's for staff to do and for us to refer to staff. When we hear public comment, according to, as far as I understand our rules, we're supposed to hear the public comments, but they are not to be addressed at individual counselors or to pose questions and then have them answered during the meeting itself. It's not to say that the questions wouldn't be answered by our staff, but it's just not an effective way to try to run meetings. It's not feasible to operate the meetings this way. We could be here all night. I kid you not.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councillor Pena.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify what Councillor Benton said in terms of like public comment, because I know, we've asked questions and questions have been asked in the past during public comment. Does public comment, Mr. Melendres, exclude us from asking questions or responding to questions?
Madam Chair, councilors, so the underlying purpose of the council rules, I think in pretty much everything there, is instilled this idea that they are to promote the orderly business of the council. And so general public comment often is for the purpose of hearing from the public, obviously very important and laudable for the council to do that. But it is ultimately at the discretion of the chair how that occurs with respect to in the event that something comes up that does necessitate an answer at the time or not. The chair has latitude, obviously subject to an override by the council or the body, but they are for the purpose of order. And so to the extent that it's more orderly to hear from folks and continue those conversations somewhere else, that is appropriate. If the chair believes or councilors request that something requires additional discussion or some back and forth, it probably is okay and still consistent with the purpose of promoting order, so long as it's not, a huge discussion that would disrupt the progress of the council.
So basically it's at the chair's discretion?
Madam Chair, councilors, yes.
Okay, that's cool. Just wanted clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Melendres. Thank you, councilors.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, may we move forward with the motion on the floor? Call for the
Yes, we may.
question.
There's a motion on and a, Petra, would you read for me? Motion in a second. Would you give me the motion, please?
Madam Chair, councilors, yes, I believe it was a motion to defer the bill to the June 16th LUPS with a second from Councilor Pena.
Thank you. That's where I was too, but we put the dates around a little too much. So there's a motion and a second to defer this meeting at this point to the June 16th LUPS. Would you take a roll, please?
Absolutely. Councilor Benton?
No.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
No.
Councilor Pena?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
No.
And that motion fails on a 2-3 vote.
Thank you, councilors. I think we are ready for do we have any more speakers? Yes, we do. We're working on the amendments now. Are there any questions, any more that you would like to tell us, Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, no, I think we were on the first amendment, and you had asked Councillor Borrego if she wanted to move the Arroyo definition amendment.
Thank you. So
Yes,
Councilor
I do.
Borrego,
Thank you.
it's on you to make a motion to move the amendment.
I move the amendments.
I'm sorry, Councilor Borrego, would you wait until I'm finished speaking so we can all hear you? Okay, it's your floor now.
Are you finished, Councillor?
I am. That's why I stopped speaking. Yes.
Okay, Councillor, I would like to move amendment A1.
That would need a second.
I'll second that.
Councilor Pena seconded. Thank you. There's a motion and a second for a do pass on A1. Let's take the vote.
Councillor Benton?
Yes.
Councillor Borrego?
Yes.
Councillor Gibson?
Yes.
Councillor Pena?
Yes.
Councillor Jones?
Yes.
And that passes on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. We can take one more. Councilor Gibson, if you would like to move amendment A2, and then we need to take a break.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I move ordinance amendment A2, campground and RV park.
There's a
second.
motion and a second for A2. Petra, do you have something, do you have a comments on this one on A2?
Madam Chair, councillors, just a short summary. Amendment A2, this would take campground and RV park from a non-residential special use zone district to be conditional in the mixed use medium, and then permissive in the non-residential commercial and the non-residential business park zone districts.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Councilor Gibson, would you like to comment more on your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to say we heard a number of things from a couple of the, I don't remember, 2 or 3 of the public speakers. Mr. Rich in particular really researched this quite a bit, and all councilors received his email. But he really did a lot of research on this. So I'd just like to point out a couple of things that I thought were, kind of stuck with me. This does potentially fill a demand for this type of overnight stay that we really don't have enough of right now. It's very clear, and there's documentation that he cites in this to show that there's so many different users. Somebody mentioned the, what are they called? Digital nomads. I just learned that. Folks who have learned how to do their jobs using the technology, communication technology, as well as living either part-time or full-time on the road. And they spend times out in rural areas, but they also come into town, and of course, you know, to do things that we would expect, go shopping and take care of services that they need to have. And there's just not enough good quality spaces for these. And I have seen several in the past weeks. Have looked and on the internet, and I have seen some very well designed and attractive looking RV parks, campground and RV parks that exist in other cities. So not only do we have the digital nomads, but we have a growing population of people who are liking to vacation this way. In fact, the prices for RVs, trailers, vans, etc., has just skyrocketed because the supply just cannot meet the demand. Right now, if you want to buy a casita, for example, you're on a waiting list because it just takes a long time to get one. The number is 10.9 million people are digital nomads, and that's just one section of this demand out there, right? And that's up from 7.3 million in 2019. So over 1 year, it's grown, what, about over 3 million. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that, you know, during this last year, we had a lot of moving around of medical personnel, doctors and technicians and nurses and nurse practitioners, and many of them did come, or did go to their new work assignment, taking their home with them, their rubber wheel home with them. And thank goodness for that, because it kept them much safer in being able to go home to their own space. And the industry has recognized that without that, we would have had a hard time. So I'm talking a little bit too long. I don't mean to, but I am really excited about this. I think that this will provide an option for people to stay here in a safe and comfortable place. And I think it's going to make a big difference in the type and the numbers of tourism that we'll have here. So I urge your support.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Pena, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Ms. Morris. So Ms. Morris, kind of this goes back to the question that Dr. Jovias had in terms of the MXM zones and the difference between the what's allowable in the MXM on the east side and the west side. So, well, let me preface it with saying that I think it's a good idea, Councillor Gibson. I think that, it's something that I'm pretty excited about. And obviously, everybody knows I'm attached to the Visitor Center, and I'm so excited about that. And if you see statistics on people who are going to be traveling by car, the numbers are pretty outstanding, right? So we do need this. So my question to Ms. Morris, though, is just how will this impact kind of underserved communities in terms of sometimes there's an unintended consequence of zoning, right? And I think I've explained that in some of our discussions before about how you can't discriminate on any person based on their color, whatever, in terms of building in a certain district, right, for affordable housing, but then it ends up, although affordable housing ends up coming into communities of color. So how do you see this maybe having a negative impact?
Madam Chair, councilors, the MXM zone is mapped on both sides of the city. The vast
Right.
majority of the MXM is on the east side of the city. And then the MXM was mapped and treated the same in the IDO on both the east and the west side. It was the MXH and the NRC that were a little bit different.
Right. I meant to say the NRC. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So the NRC, while where there was C3 zoning on the west side, there was a preference for converting it to NRC rather than to MXH. The vast majority of the NRC is still mapped on the east side of town. There's only a handful of locations on the west side where the NRC is mapped. So most of these campground and RV parks would go on the east side of the city. There is not very much NRC or NRBP zoning on the west side of the city. It's mostly on the east side.
Okay, and it wasn't what my preference would that it would be on the east side. I just wanted to make sure that it was going to have a larger negative impact on the west side. So, okay, okay.
Thank you,
Ms. Morris.
Thank you, Councilor Pena. Any other questions or discussions? If not, Councilor Gibson, would you like to close?
I urge your support.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second on a do pass for A2. Would you take the roll, please?
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 5-0 vote.
And thank you all. We're going to need to take a break now. We have some time constraints with people helping us. So let's reconvene at 5:30, please. Thank you. All right, counselors, are we all back in place now? Shall we start up again? Do you want to give me a high five so I know you're all here? Good. I'm missing Counselor Gibson, Counselor Borrego, and Counselor Pena. Counselor Borrego, thank you. Let's see if we can get Counselor Gibson and Counselor Pena. I hope you enjoyed your break. Feels kind of nice to get up and walk around, doesn't it?
All I did was take another call.
Yeah, I think so. There we go. There's Counselor Gibson. We'll give Counselor Pena a couple more minutes. I came on a little early. Counselor Borrego, you're on mute.
Counselor Benton's voice is muted or like.
Funny. Yeah. Do you want to talk, Counselor Benton? Let's see what you sound like. Yep, he's on mute.
Speak. Speak, counselor, speak.
Okay, Counselor Benton, we want to hear you speak. He's not on. You might want to leave and.
You guys are on YouTube.
He's being shy.
Okay.
I think we lost him.
I think so too.
Yeah.
There we go. There you go, Counselor Benton.
Can you
Let's one more minute and
Can you
we'll
hear me
start
now?
again for Counselor
Can
Pena.
you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Nobody remembers that ad. Or very
I do.
Well,
Hello, Counselor Pena. You are very prompt. Thank you. So let's call this meeting back to order. And we're going to start off with a presentation by Petra on A3, A4, anyway, 4 amendments. So they will not be voted on. They will just be give us an idea of what's going on with them. Petra, whenever you're ready.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes. So the next 2 amendments plus Amendment A19, these are the 3 cannabis amendments. The IDO 2019, so the first IDO annual update, we added a framework for cannabis that involves cannabis retail as a use, cannabis cultivation, which is the growing as a use, and then cannabis manufacturing, that's doing stuff with the things that you grow ready to sell. The IDO has zone districts where these uses are allowed or conditional, and some general standards about distances from sensitive uses, residential, schools, and daycare. However, since the 2019 IDO went into effect, the state has developed and approved the New Mexico Cannabis Regulations Act. And so there are, in response to that, 3 amendments that councillors have requested to respond to that state action. We're not going to move on these tonight. They'll be considered at full council, but they are out there for the public to consider. The first one is A3. This is a cannabis cultivation and manufacturing. This amendment takes cannabis cultivation and cannabis manufacturing from a prohibited use to a conditional use when located within 330 feet of a residential zone, school, or child daycare facility. Amendment A, and this is if Amendment A4 passes, then the 330 feet in this would be changed to 300. Amendment A4, this is kind of a tidy up amendment and makes revisions to the distances and references to licensed premise to be in compliance with the New Mexico Cannabis Regulation Act. And so this one has revisions in cannabis retail, cultivation, and manufacturing. It's kind of a tidy up one, and it gets to the 300 feet that the Cannabis Regulation Act specifically refers to. And I'll jump ahead in the presentation now to the third Cannabis Act amendment, which is A19. This is an amendment that comes at the request of the administration. This amendment would prohibit on-site consumption until the state has implemented regulations. The language in the amendment on this is in the bill rather than in the IDO, as this is an item that will be relevant for a short period of time, but not something that would be relevant in the future once the state rules are implemented. In the exhibit, so permanent changes to the IDO, this would prohibit cannabis retail and cannabis on-site consumption in Main Street areas and within 660 feet of Main Street areas. It would require 1,000 feet between a cannabis retail use and an adult use, so that would be adult entertainment or adult retail. It would limit the size of on-site consumption areas to 500 square feet. It would limit signage in terms of type and content, and in relation to design, hours, and what the signage could cover. It limits hours of activity to 10 p.m. and to not be active between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And then it adds a definition to on-site consumption to clarify what that consumption is, and then also that is part of a retail use. Councillors, any questions on the 3 cannabis amendments that are not going?
Councillor Borrego, you have a question?
Yes, so if we are, you said we're not acting on this earlier, Madam Chair. So Petra, if we're not acting on this, what does that mean? What is the process then? Does it come back to LUPS, or do these go straight to council and without recommendation, or what is the strategy?
Madam Chair, councillors, there would be no vote on these 3 amendments tonight, so they wouldn't get moved. The idea about the presentation is so that the public knows what the content is. A lot of people are watching LUPS now and will maybe watch the video later. And so the public has an opportunity to consider these, but they would come back in the form of a floor amendment at full council. So assuming that a councillor wanted to continue to sponsor an amendment, then they would come back at full council. Potentially, a councillor might hear some public comments and decide they want to change some aspect of an amendment, and so maybe it would be a revised version that comes back at full council. To help in transparency, when we do have an amendment that started at LUPS but changes at council, we do different colors to show where the changes have occurred.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to mention to you that I had asked the staff to put together, and this is for all of the councilors, to put together a study session just to discuss cannabis. And it hasn't been scheduled yet, but they're working on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that. That should be helpful. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, Petra, is that the end of the presentation? Thank you. Oh, you would need to do A19?
A5.
A5. One more.
Oh, Madam Chair, sorry, that's the end of the cannabis presentation, but not the overall presentation.
Great. We have a little more presentation coming up.
Okay, so the next amendment for acting on, so A3 and A4, if you're following the numbers, are 2 of the cannabis ones. So the next one to consider taking a vote on is A5, daytime gathering. So this amendment strikes all references to the daytime gathering use. This use is defined as too broad and encompasses uses it isn't intended to cover, and to narrow the definition would result in a potential discrimination against those considered a protected class under the Fair Housing Act. So any questions on this amendment? If not, I think it's over to you guys to move and vote. And
yes, if there are no questions, Councillor Gibson, this is your sponsor. Would you like to move this legislation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead and move the LUPS amendment A5, daytime gathering.
There's Councillor Benton, your second. Okay, there's a motion by Counselor Gibson to move A5 and a second by Counselor Benton. Counselors, is there any discussion? Counselor Gibson, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think that I don't think there was any malintent when we first did this. I think that we realized it became more apparent to the city as time went on. So I'm very happy to see our planning staff bring this up, and I'm glad to be sponsoring it because I think it really was a mistake. So I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Gibson. There's a motion and a second. Would you take the roll, please?
Absolutely. Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you. Moving right along, Counselor Benton on A6.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not going to be moving this amendment tonight, but I would like to have a bit of discussion on it. We heard about this from many of the speakers today. And I am well aware of the long history and really am friends with most of the people who were advising the planning department on this amendment. So I don't think anybody should get anything wrong that I'm somehow carrying water for somebody who doesn't want to have to do these things. My issue is to the contrary, and I may have mentioned it before, the concern is that this is really not regulatory. It is, if you read it, it says that the design professional shall prepare these checklists, which are all good things, and good designers should be doing that. I don't question that in any way. And I applaud Ms. Wolfley's, who did so much work on this, and we've had a good discussion about it as well just yesterday. But my concern is really that you're asking the developer and the architect to go through an exercise. Okay, what's the outcome of that exercise? The wording implies that for instance, just to take one of the, not the part I struck out actually, but even the first part, you're going to do an analysis to improve the energy performance, but it's not saying that you shall improve the energy performance. It's just saying that you shall conduct an analysis. And Jolene and I had a long, good discussion about this. I understand better her intention and the intentions of those who brought this forward. But what worries me is that it just doesn't really have any teeth. But as she said, as Jolene, Associate Director Ms. Wolfley said, that the intention was to inspire but not require. And I think that's laudable. I totally applaud that. However, we need to be careful that the IDO does not become some aspirational document, and that is something that is lean and mean. That's what it was always intended to be. And we're going to be expanding it as we do these community assessments. That's why that is so important that we keep that on schedule. We will be expanding the IDO to take into account the aspirations of different communities. But so I understand the popularity of this, and I am very much, again, in favor of the intent. I'm not going to move it because I'm going to try to at least wordsmith it. I don't think we're in a position to create an enforceable mechanism at this point, but we could perhaps, if this is going to be something that's kind of just guiding something that we might do more of in the future, then we need to be very clear about that. So, but I'm open to any questions, and I have heard the concerns. I think this is laudable. These are laudable goals. And the idea of inspiring but not requiring is an interesting concept for a regulatory document, but I'm not going to knock it or anything, because that's That's a laudable goal as well. But so I'll just leave it at that, and I will not be moving the amendment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. Are there any questions or comments? All right, moving right along to Amendment 7. Petra, Ms. Morris, sorry.
Madam Chair, Councilors, A7, this is light vehicle sales. This amendment would allow light vehicle sales to be displayed outdoors in the MXH zone, and unless they are in an UCMS PT area. So if you're an MXH and it's UCMS PT, you would be prohibited from doing the outdoor display, but in all other areas zoned MXH, you would be able to do the outdoor display. Madam Chair, I believe this is your amendment to consider moving.
Yes, I would make a motion for approval and open the floor for any. Do I have a second? Looks like I have no second on that.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? With that, let's call the roll.
Counselor Benton,
No.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson, Counselor Gibson, Counselor Pena, Counselor Pena, Counselor Pena.
Counselor Gibson's.
I can barely hear you. Did you call on me or Counselor
I
Gibson?
did. Counselor Pena,
No.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-2 vote.
Thank you. Next on the list is Amendment A8. Ms. Morris, would you like to tell us what that is?
Madam Chair, Councilors, yes, this is another amendment at the request of the administration. Last year, as part of the 2019 update, we introduced a new use, nicotine retail. And we also made some revisions to the liquor retail. This amendment would make liquor retail conditional in all zones unless accessory to a grocery store, which is a defined use in the IDO. And nicotine retail would also become conditional in all zones unless accessory to general retail or a grocery store. So if you think about types of stores, nicotine retail could be would be accessory in maybe a Walgreens or a grocery store, but not just nicotine retail as standalone. And liquor retail again would be conditional unless accessory to a grocery store, but not as a standalone, for example, like a packaged liquor.
Thank you. Councilors, any questions? Along those lines, if there are no, Councilor Borrego.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So Petra, if you have a grocery store that is in a residential zone, or I guess that's grandfathered in.
Madam Chair, Councilors, existing ones would be grandfathered in. This is about future liquor retail. If you're in proximity to residential, it's conditional. And so I believe the liquor retail would be, if the liquor retail is associated with a grocery store, but close to residential, that would still be a conditional use. It's just liquor retail as a standalone that this is affecting.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Borrego, do you have any other questions? Okay. Councilors, any other questions? All right, there's a motion and a second on a due pass. Let's take the roll, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
No.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
And Counselor Jones.
No.
And that passes on a 3-2 vote.
Goodbye. All right, counselors, moving on to Amendment 9. Counselor Benton, this would be yours.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll move this, which would be, help me out, amendment number.
Amendment number 9. I'll
So,
give you the, it is the major public open space zoning.
Right. And this reads as follows on page 478, section 6.7, amend the text as follows. The subsection applies to any application that would amend the official zoning map to change any parcels or parcels to the NRPOB zone district, regardless of the of gross area, designation of area change or consistency. And so this would add a provision of applicability. I guess I'll ask Ms. Morris to elaborate.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, this amendment. Oh, am I muted or unmuted? Oh, there we go. Sorry, Madam Chair, councillors, this amendment would make EPC the approving body for all zone map amendments to the NRPOB zone district, which is the non-residential parks and open space zone district for city-owned properties. Zone map amendments occur after property is purchased. And so council has a role in the purchase of a property. And so they've already given their blessing, as it were, about the site. And so it's not necessary for council then to approve the zone change. And it's appropriate for council to delegate their zone changing authority to the Planning Commission for lots of any size when converting to NRPOB.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think I have one. So Petra, would you give me just a brief? So this means that the council already has a role, but would they have a second role in this type of thing?
Madam Chair, councillors, this would be not requiring the council to have a second role. So their first role would be in the purchase. And this would say you don't need, it doesn't need to come back to council. The idea being that the IDO has a lot of protections for non-residential, for major public open space. And so the faster we can get those protections applied to a property, the sooner those protections can kick in.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Councilors, are there any other questions? Okay, there's a motion and a second. Let's, oh, we still need a second.
Yeah, I didn't hear a second. Thank you.
Is there a second on that?
I'll second it.
There's a second by Councilor Gibson. Let's call the roll, please.
Counselor Benton. Counselor Benton.
Yes.
Counselor Borrego.
No.
Counselor Gibson.
Yes.
Counselor Pena.
No.
And Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-2 vote.
Thank you, councilors. Ms. Morris, we're moving on to A10.
Madam Chair, councillors, A10, this is the mixed-use light drive-through amendment. This amendment takes drive-throughs from a conditional use to a permissive accessory use in the MXL zone district.
Okay, councilors. There is a motion. Is there a second? I haven't put a motion through yet. I would make a motion for a due pass. And this, of course, is at the request. This is by request of the administration. Is there?
No, this is yours.
I lied. This is mine. Sorry. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, Counselor Pena, thank you. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? We'll call the roll. Thank you.
Counselor Benton,
No.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-2 vote.
Okay, with that confusion, let's go on to Amendment 11, A11. Would you like to give us a
Yes.
description on this one?
Madam Chair, councillors, this is a non-commercial broadcasting antennas. So this amendment lists the zone districts in which a non-commercial broadcasting antenna is allowed. The IDO already has a height limitation for non-commercial broadcasting antennas and a definition, but it does not list what zone districts this use is allowed in. When the IDO was originally drafted, non-commercial broadcasting antennas were included in the section on wireless telecommunication facilities. However, we realized during the adoption process that there are different federal regulations associated with non-commercial broadcasting antennas from wireless telecommunication facilities. So we separated them out, but forgot to add non-commercial antennas in the use table. And so this is just making that correction. We're quite heavily regulated by the Federal Communications FCC on what we can or can't do in terms of restrictions. And so this is allowed in most zone districts throughout the city.
Thank you. Thanks for the explanation. So I will move a do pass. And Clarissa, Counselor Pena seconded that. Is there any discussion?
Oh, I think it was me, Adam.
Counselor Borrego, did you have a question?
No, I think I'm the one who seconded it, but I'm
Oh,
not sure.
I'm so sorry. Counselor Borrego seconded that. I just saw a hand. I didn't see, I saw hands. Okay, let's call the roll, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena, Counselor Pena,
Yes, sorry.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 5-0 vote.
Next, we have A12, which will not be discussed.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, this one's not for moving. This is an amendment on the overnight shelter bed numbers. I did a little bit of a summary and response during the general public comments. So if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Thank you so very much. And the next one is A13. And would you give us a description of that, please?
Madam Chair, councillors, yes. This amendment completes the edits and revisions from Pnm on the electric generation use-specific standards and procedures. This is an ongoing discussion through the EPC process. This amendment was drafted in collaboration with the planning department and Pnm to basically tidy up the work that was done at EPC.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. I would like to, obviously, this is my request, and I would like to make a motion do pass.
Second.
Counselor Borrego is the second. Are there any questions or comments? Counselor Pena?
There was actually some public comment. I think it's in reference to this one, Ms. Morris. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry. That reference that we should not have a private company's name. Should we amend that, or was that just inaccurate? Or is it taken out? It is taken out.
Madam Chair, councillors, the Pnm's name is in the amendment, but the section is about the electric generation use specific standard. The IDO doesn't use the term Pnm, and that's a good point from the public. That's sloppy work on our work, in that we was also familiar with Pnm. We kind of treat them like a governmental agency, and so we probably really should have called this the electric generation amendment. So my apologies for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let's call the roll, please.
Madam
Councilor,
Chair,
you wanna say something?
I was going to suggest that, that we amend the name as part of our motion.
I believe that's already been done, Councilor Borrego.
But we didn't get a second on that, on the amendment.
Please. Petra, would you like to say
Sure.
something?
Madam Chair, councillors, so the reference to Pnm is only in the amendment title, it's not in any of the text in the IDO. And so I'm not sure what changing the title of the amendments would do.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Borrego.
as I read this, or as I read this on number 2, it says electric service provision from the Public Service Company of New Mexico, and it references Pnm. And it's in table 5-1-1. And then as you read further in section 5-4, I4 or L4, I'm not sure what that is. So it is referenced.
Madam Chair, councillors, thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, I had forgotten about that part of the amendment. So part of the work that we did with Pnm was there was a request to reference the NESC standards and the Pnm Electric guide. The IDO already makes a reference to this, and so these revisions were to clarify how that Pnm Electric guide is relevant to properties. And so Pnm, as the electric provider, has certain design guidelines that they require people to follow before they will give them power to the site. And so the concern from Pnm was that if somebody looks at the IDO, they design their site entirely around the IDO, there's no warning or reminder to them that there might be some other rules that apply. And so we added this language at the request of Pnm to be sure that the public was aware when they were designing a site that they would need to consider the design constraints within the Pnm design guideline book, which is what they use before they give somebody power to the site. This was intended to make sure that folks in designing a site didn't go down one design route and then suddenly find, after they've got all their approvals, that they can't get Pnm to approve electric provision to the site. So it's just kind of an early warning. And so that there is a reference, thank you for reminding me that there is a reference to Pnm in the IDO, but it's in reference to this design book.
So do we need the amendment or not, Petra?
We do need the amendment, yes.
Okay.
This is an important amendment.
So Councillor Pena, was your motion and I'd second it, or how do we do that, Madam Chair?
Oh, sorry, I meant we need the amendment A13 as is, not the IDO, not the amendment to be amended. The amendment to A13 does need to reference Pnm.
And it does.
And it
So
does.
I apologize for the interruption, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Councilor Pena.
I think I'm clear. Thank you.
I think what we're saying is the item that we're voting on, A13, is correct, and it needs to have the Pnm reference in it. Petra's nodding her head, so I think that's it. All right, are there any other questions or comments? Let's move forward and call the roll then, please. Thank you.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena, Counselor Pena,
Councilor Pena?
Counselor
Pena?
Jones.
Yes. Councilor Pena?
That
Yes.
passes.
I'm unmuted, so am I being heard or?
You are, yes.
Okay, okay.
And the vote was yes, just to confirm?
Your vote is yes? Thank you.
That passes on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you. We're getting near the end, guys. Amendment 14. Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, Amendment A14 does two things. This is the post-application facilitated meeting for site plan administrative. So site plan administrative are the smallest scale types of applications, and they're the applications that don't go to any kind of boards like the zoning hearing examiner, the development review board, or the EPC. In some instances, these cases will have already gone through the DRB process for a subdivision. This amendment proposes to strike low-density residential development from the site plan admin post-submittal facilitated meeting list, and then to reduce the number of days in which a site plan administrative post-submittal facilitated meeting can be requested from 15 days to 10 days. The intention here is to try and strike a balance between the neighborhood's interest in the opportunity to request a site plan administrated post-submittal facilitated meeting, and also to allow the planning department to continue to approve and review and approve site plan administrative requests in a timely manner.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Are there any other questions? Okay, and this is Councilor Bassan's, and we made a motion to approve. I know. Waiting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Councilor Gibson is the second. Any more discussion? Call the roll, please.
Madam
Wait. Councilor Benton?
Madam President, yeah, if I just could, so if Ms. Morris would just kind of repeat the timeline repercussions of this. I just wanted to hear that again. As far as getting projects approved and, you know, the effect upon that.
Madam Chair, councilors, yes. So if somebody submits an application today without this amendment passing, the application would sit at the planning department for 15 days before code enforcement could begin to review it. The reasoning for that is that the software that code enforcement works with doesn't allow an application to proceed and then come back. It doesn't have a pause button, as it were. It just has to sit there. And so this would mean that all applications would be taking a minimum of 3 weeks to be approved. 2 weeks, it's 15 calendar days. And so some of the amendments, for example, site plans, for example, low density residential development get reviewed in a matter of a day or so. These are the sort of applications where there's already been a site plan reviewed, it's gone through DRB, and this is just a single site, individual house coming in for its site plan admin. Those are a pretty quick turnaround usually, but then without this amendment, they would have to sit there for 15 days before code enforcement could begin review. For the other types of requests, so for example, multifamily, those would be reduced from 15 days to 10 days for that type of request. So any other, does that help on the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is addressed at scale, right? I mean, the scale of the smaller projects, and when you have overall governing approved plan, and then you're just getting a permit for one-off under that existing plan, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor, sorry, can you repeat that question? I got distracted.
Yeah. This is primarily trying to fix the small scale approvals. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor, yes, that's correct.
It would only have a 5-day impact on the bigger ones.
Yes, that's correct. So this would impact it would fix it entirely for the low density residential, but it would just be a sort of a in-between fix for the other site plan admin types of requests. And this is kind of trying to get a compromise between the planning department, who are trying to get things through in a timely manner, and the neighborhoods who would like to still have an opportunity to ask for a site plan admin post-submittal facilitated meeting. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, counselors? And of course, I am carrying this for Councilor Bassan, and it seems like a good compromise for everyone to try to get things through as our production is going to start booming, we hope, in the city. So there's a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor? Oh, wait, I can't do it that way. Let's call a roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you. I think we're getting closer. Amendment A15. Petra, would you like to address this one?
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, Amendment A15. Earlier, I think I described this one as the ripple in the pond. So this is a series of edits and clarifications to the IDO based on the recommendations made at EPC. These came from the planning department, and the planning department, in putting together the red line, realized there were a couple of items that the EPC recommendations didn't quite address the complete thread of the changes that needed to be made.
Thank you. Councilors, do you have any questions? I would move a do pass.
Second.
Councilor Borrego, you have a question? Councilor Pena has a question.
Yeah, Petra, I read through these technical amendments, and there's a lot of them, and they're very design specific. So my question is, for small developers that are trying to survive, how do they maneuver through all of those design? I mean, it seems to me like it's going to cause some undue difficulty for people who are the smaller developers that don't, that don't understand all of the design criteria. And so I just wonder how that, I was frankly, when I read through them, I was, I'm a planner, so I understand them, but for people who don't, and they're just trying to do some small jobs, how does that not impact them?
Madam Chair, councillors, so I think the amendments that you're referring to are some clarifications to the proposed multifamily text that Ms. Wolfley was working on. Those are the design changes that are in this technical edits amendment. There was some language that we needed to clarify within the IDO to make sure that the intent of the work that Ms. Wolfley had worked on was properly enforced, as it was enforced as intended rather than maybe as drafted. And so those design references that you're referring to are the work that Ms. Wolfley has been doing with the architectural and development community. So there's two prongs. There's some changes to the multifamily design, and then there's a section on climatic responsiveness and geographic responsiveness, which Councilor Benton has been focused on.
Okay, so I had difficulty just reading them and thinking about design as I was thinking about a smaller development. And, I've had a significant amount of experience, and I was just concerned that we're trying to spur economic development, but at the same time, people who are trying to survive and put food on their table, paycheck to paycheck, are going to be impacted by some of this. And probably I'm going to vote no on this for now, because I need some stronger answers than that. And I don't want to see, I want to see everyone working in our city, not just the big developers that can afford architects and and lawyers and such. I want to see the smaller developers as well. And so I'd like to have a meeting with you on this one between now and council.
Thank you. Councillor Pena and then Councillor Benton.
Yeah, this is, thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Ms. Morris, just based on Councillor Borrego's comments. These are just really technical edits, correct? And clarification. There's no, I think maybe what, and just help me, I think what Councillor Borrego is reading is what we already have in the IDO, and these are not the changes, right? You're just making clarifications and technical edits. So everyone's without except Councillor Borrego. I mean, that's the way I understand it. So if it's different, let me know.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes. These are just those corrections within there. That the largest section on the multifamily changes are mostly within the red line, and this is what's in the technical edits is just some tidy up to the language that was recommended by the EPC on the multifamily design regs.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Petra, for so I was clear.
Thank you, Councillor Pena and Councillor Benton.
I think thanks for asking that question, Councillor Pena, and for the clarification. And also, I was going to just point out that most of this language, if you look at it in depth, Councillor Borrego, Madam President, is they're really mostly making it easier to comply. They're actually less strenuous after the amendment than most of these, I would say, than prior.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor.
I just still would like to meet with Petra because that's not how I read it. And maybe I interpret it different, but I'd like to be corrected if that's the case. But for now, until council, I think I'm going to probably vote no on this.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. I'm sure Ms. Morris would be happy to meet with you. Are there any other comments? Then there's been a motion and a second on a due pass. Oh, there's a motion. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councilor Pena. Ms. Morris, sorry.
Councillor Benton.
Yes.
Councillor Borrego.
No.
Councillor Gibson.
Yes.
Councillor Pena.
Yes.
And Councillor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you, councilors. We're getting towards the end. We are getting towards the ends. Councilor Benton, if you would like to move amendment A16, actually, I'll move amendment A16 and then let you discuss it. Would you like to second that? Councilor Benton, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I will second that.
Okay,
And then
Ms. Morris, do you want to give us an overview and then I'll turn it over to Councilor Benton.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes. So Amendment A6, some of you may remember a resolution that went through council about a month ago, limiting the authority of the CEO in granting taller walls and addressing some concerns about a phrase low density residential. This amendment is in response to that. And so this would add the missing phrase residential from low density development. The IDO has multiple places where it references low density residential development, but it doesn't have low density development. So this just makes that correction. And then this amendment also limits the CEO's authority for granting taller walls and fences to just those surrounding critical infrastructure, which was the original intent of the EPC recommendation during the adoption of the IDO for this section.
Thank you. Anyone have questions of Ms. Morris? Then Councilor Benton, it's yours to close.
Yes, I think this is a simple cleanup, and this is the kind of amendment that the EPC is not necessarily going to catch, planning department not necessarily going to catch, and these come up, and this is our last chance to fix them when they're before the council. So nothing nefarious about these kind of amendments. We're actually making it much more clear as to what was intended. So I urge your support.
Thank you. Motion in a second. Let's take the roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 5-0 vote.
Okay, we're moving right along. Counselor Benton, Amendment A17. I'm going to let Ms. Morris give us a little overview first.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, Amendment A17. This responds to this refers to the urban residential form in the form-based zone district. These revisions make some changes to the language in there to encourage small-scale infill residential development in terms of its residential form, especially on small lots. It makes changes to building entrances, ground floor clear height, window percentages, and on the ground and upper floor levels, sill height, and window shape. The residential forms in the form-based tend to lead towards more commercial forms of building, but the urban residential form is intended to be for development that is 100% residential. And so these revisions create a more residential character. If you imagine a row house in form, for
Thank
example.
you. Are there any questions? Counselor Benton.
Yeah, just again, this was a good small fix to this particular zone. I don't know that we've had any applications, or I guess there's, maybe some applications on the horizon for the use of this form in this zone. But what we did actually, for the most part, in analyzing the building forms was actually reduce the amount of windows required and not have it feel too much like a storefront and have it feel more like a residence, which is what it is.
Thank you, Counselor Benton. Counselors? All right. Yes, I seconded it. So there's a motion and a second on this one. Let's call the roll, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 5-0 vote.
All right. Counselor Borrego, I think you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last amendment that we have in our packet is a further protection of the northwest area. And I guess probably Petra should be reading this, not me.
Would
But
you like
it's
for her to
it's
give her overview before you speak, Counselor?
Yes. Yes,
All right,
please.
thank you. Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, this amendment, whoops, technical differences here of a physical nature. We got a little squiggly person. Sorry about that. I know. So this amendment proposes a second height sub area. So the Northwest Mesa VPO currently has an existing height sub area, and this would be a concentric ring around the existing height sub area that would have additional protections in terms of heights, landscaping, and uses. Within this second height sub area, building heights would be limited to 30 feet. Additional landscaping would be required, and then potentially incompatible uses would be limited within this area.
May I ask a question?
Sorry, I hear it too many times. Counselor Borrego, it's back to you.
Oh, Counselor Jones, I think Counselor Gibson has a question.
I see that. I don't have
Before I
it on the
close.
screen, but Counselor Gibson?
Yes, thank you. So here's my question. 30 feet in a ribbon around the existing area where there's already a height restriction. What kind of building do we anticipate in that ribbon area, that this second area, second ribboned area around the first?
Counselor Borrego, would you like to answer that?
Counselor Gibson, much of this area is zoned residential, so it'd be single family homes for the most part. There's primarily single family residential already.
And what about the, are there any places where there might be commercial or?
Well,
anything
the thing is that this is adjacent to the petroglyphs, really. I mean, it's really protecting, giving that further protection to the petroglyphs. So it's really that's the intended goal.
Oh, to give a view of to the petroglyphs, right?
To keep that buffer or maintain that buffer, much like in the close to the Sandias, you don't have very high buildings, so it's much like that.
Okay, so my question was you're trying to protect at least for some of that perimeter. Are you trying to then protect the view of the
Yes, we're trying
escarpment?
to protect the view plane. Yes.
Of the escarpment.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So my other question is, what is standard for building heights? Is there a number, a magic number that we have to have a minimum height?
Petra?
Thank you. We'll have Ms. Morris answer that. Thank you, Councilor Gibson.
Madam Chair, councillors, generally modern commercial buildings come in at about 35 feet in height. The single family residential is usually up to about 26 feet, which is the single family height limitation.
Okay.
Councilor Gibson, do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Councilors, are there other questions? Councilor Borrego.
Urge your support. Thank you.
Did we get a second on it? There's a motion and we need a second now. Sorry, I'm getting this out of order, everyone. I'll second that. There's a motion and a second. Councilor Benji, do you have a question or are you seconding?
I was seconding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Benton. Let's call the roll, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Qualified, yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 5-0 vote.
With that, councilors, we are down to the final bill here. And this is Councilor Benton, do you want to try to do this one? It's a move a do pass as amended. Would you like to get your name on this since you did all the work? Guess not. Councilor Benton?
I don't seem to have it in my packet, so.
Okay, I will. All right. Yeah. This is a do pass of this legislation as amended. Would you like to second it?
Oh, for the entire bill, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the notes are difficult for me tonight. So there's a motion and a second to pass as amended. Any comments? Let's call the roll, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 5-0 vote.
Let's make sure I'm not doing this wrong, but I believe that concludes the business for the evening. And therefore, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your patience. We'll do better the next time when we don't have so many things to vote on. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
All right.